and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs, Jamie Franklin and Tom Pelham. You know what, Tom, last week I realised I introduced you, but I didn't introduce Daniel, who was on the show, which was very, very rude of me. I don't know whether you realised that.
I did realise it, but most people know.
It was an accident. And
most people know Daniel is.
I wasn't thinking. Because the thing is, I've got like a million things to think about when we're doing the show. I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. You know, people, you know, it's like a duck gliding along on the water and his legs are just like flapping around underneath there, like furiously paddling away. So we're always thinking about stuff, aren't we, Tom? We're thinking about entertaining people. We're thinking about feeding people spiritually. We're thinking about the news and what's going on in the world and developing a prophetic, though insightful and interesting take on it. And, you know, probably we're both checking Twitter quite a lot of the time as well. Because, you know, because we're very half listening to what the other person is saying.
It has happened.
Happened once or twice.
We need to be, you know, we need to be on top of breaking news so that people who listen to this 48 hours later can be aware that we're on top of breaking news, Jamie.
There's so much is breaking all the time.
So
everything. So much is breaking.
At the moment, did you know? You know, talking of which, Christian and Concern have just put a video of the Muslim call to prayer resounding through Windsor Castle's feast hall because they've just had an iftar meal there.
Oh my goodness! You're joking.
And this is Windsor Castle.
Oh
course.
My goodness!
And they've got it's quite funny because the sort of video, quite high quality video, pans round, and the Windsor Castle is obviously decorated with St George crosses absolutely everywhere. So there's a sort of sense of, you know, the thing which St George. Anyway,
it
wasn't a crusader, it must be said. He was not a crusader, but his cross was used by crusaders, wasn't it?
Well, the Crusades was actually on balance a good thing, in my opinion. But
yeah. Well, it's just a response to Islam. This sort of
they were murdering Christians in the Holy Land.
Well, they expanded rapidly, didn't they? And they continued. I mean, it didn't really work in the end. We managed to preserve just about Italy, I guess, and Spain in the end. But you know, the Byzantine Empire collapsed.
Yeah,
which is why Constantinople is now a pagan city.
Yeah. Rodney Stark's got a really good book on the Crusades called God's Battalions, I think it's called. And there's also a very good short chapter in his book. What's it called?
Anyway, that's the breaking news of the Christian Concern. You know, the iftar sounding in.
I think it's called an iftar. It's an iftar.
But at least we don't have to do. Usually at this time of year, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, would release an annual kind of piece of syncretism, and he hasn't this year because he's no longer Archbishop of Canterbury. So it counts our blessings, really.
He might have done it on his personal account, but
maybe.
I'm not really aware of that. Bearing False Witness is the name of the book. I was thinking. That's got a good. Is this today that this is happening? Because this has been.
I don't think it's today.
2 hours ago. It's Ash Wednesday today. It wouldn't surprise me if they're having an iftar meal on Ash Wednesday. I mean, nothing would surprise me. Nothing would surprise me nowadays, Tom.
Do you know what? You know, it's really not necessary. He's a defender of the faith, and he's allowing another. But he's a syncretist, isn't he? He's basically he believes that Islam is a valid route to God.
He's a perennialist.
If he believes anything vaguely spiritual, presumably, is a valid route to God. Because
I think he believes that, like all the major religions, all the world religions.
But why do you draw the line?
Expressions of the same thing. I don't know.
I'm
not a perennialist myself. I mean,
it's just that's what I don't understand. It's like, where do you draw the line? Like, do we say that Satanism is a route to God? Do we have to say that? Is there any logical reason why you can't say that? They would say that. They would say that indulging in our own deepest desires and enslaving ourselves to our will is the only route to God. That's what the Satanists would say. So why are they wrong, King Charles? Why are they wrong?
I don't know. We'll have to get. I'm not King Charles, obviously. We'll have to get a perennialist on the show, and you can debate with them and see what they say.
They're actually,
because it's a thought. You know, it's more thought through than that. I mean, you know, I'm sure there'd be an answer to that question. Why do
the Jedis not have it right? Were the Aztecs right, Jeremy? Were the Aztecs right to slaughter children?
I am loath to speculate as to what they say, but I know, for example, Charles Taylor's view, as you might imagine, given that
was he a perennialist?
Read quite a lot of Charles Taylor. He's a sort of a Hegelian Roman Catholic, really. But he thinks that, around the turn of what's sometimes called the Axial Age, the world religions, the major world religions, all kind of developed together, obviously, excepting Islam. So things like, sort of Christianity and Buddhism and maybe not Hinduism. Hinduism a bit older, but anyway, humanity. He thinks humanity took a kind of quantum leap forward at the point of the Axial Age, and that humanity is essentially developing towards a more spiritually enlightened state. So he thinks, in that, like I say, in a kind of Hegelian sense, that that humanity is developing and growing in its understanding, and Christianity is a part of that. And I think he'd presumably have to say that Islam is a part of that as well, because it comes later in the historical dialectic. So in that sense, he would say that all of these religions are accessing some kind of truth and pushing humanity closer to an enlightened position. So I don't know what Prince Charles would say, but it seems to me that he would probably think a reasonably similar thing.
Similar thing going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote a review of the book in which Charles Taylor said that for a journal called Modern Believing, which is actually a really liberal journal. But I said that viewpoint sits uneasily with his profession of Roman Catholicism, and I stick by that. I don't think it really fits.
Even Vatican II.
Well, arguably, it's congruent with Vatican II, because many people think that Vatican II basically implies a universalist viewpoint.
Yeah.
So, but I don't want to get into that, man.
No,
I'm not a Roman Catholic myself. So I'm not criticizing Roman Catholics or the Roman Catholic Church or even Charles Taylor. All I'm doing is just reporting what he said in that book, which is called Avenues of Faith, which is a very good book, actually. Okay. It's about Charles Taylor's 5 favorite books. And yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, enough about Charles Taylor, Tom. Let's talk.
When is your book coming out? Talking of Charles Taylor, we've
got some notices, don't we? One of which is
your book.
It's about my book. It's coming out next week on the 13th.
Are you doing book signings up and down the country?
No, I've got nothing planned currently.
You should do.
Book release date. I've got booked in my MOT appointment, car MOT, and then mass. Which would be a good day. So people can pre-order my book, Great Return, Why Only Restoration of Christianity Can Save Civilization.
Is the mass going to have the intention of your car passing the MOT?
Yes, I could bring. That's a very good idea, actually. When I say, "Let us bring before the Lord our prayers and intentions for this mass," I will, in my mind, put my car.
A greasy mechanic, yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I know my car needs new tires. I don't even expect it to pass the MOT, because I know we've got to get some new tires on the back.
Living on faith, Jamie. That's not living on faith, right?
Yeah, but I don't want my car to just scrape through the MOT and then to be driving on unsafe tires. So
no, that's true.
Anyway, get what I was saying there. Oh yeah, so my book's coming out next week, so people can pre-order that on Amazon or anywhere else if you don't like Amazon. But I find Amazon fine, to be honest with you. I don't see what the problem is. I don't see what the big deal is. You want to use Amazon, just use it. Why feel guilty about it, Tom? It's grace, isn't it, Tom? Do you know what I mean? Why should we feel guilty about using Amazon? You tell me.
I guess someone who felt guilty about using Amazon would say it's usually about paying tax, isn't it? They don't like how they don't pay tax, or they treat then they claim that they treat their workers badly in the warehouses. But I suspect most warehouse workers are treated fairly badly in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to avoid tax, if you can avoid tax, then
you should.
That's my.
I mean, the government could.
Legally, the government. This isn't legal advice, by the way. If one wanted to avoid tax legally, and one could.
That's the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, strictly speaking, is that tax avoidance is legal, i.e. putting money in an ISA is tax avoidance. Tax evasion is illegal and wrong.
You shouldn't do it. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Yeah. There is that thing, is it in The Simpsons when Kent Brockman makes that distinction about tax avoidance? It's like tax avoidance.
Well, they did muddy the water.
Squared tax avoidance, doesn't it? Do you remember?
They keep muddying the water, the politicians, but in the end, it's their job to close loopholes. I mean, they really can do that.
Yeah, that's true. But do you know that Simpsons episode, which I'm talking about, where Kent Brockman, the news anchor, says tax avoidance, and he obviously somebody says something in his ears, and he says, "Well, I don't say evasion, I say avoidance."
All right, fair enough.
So it's not funny. You had to be there.
You had to be there. Okay.
Yeah, anyway, we should do scripture. We really got two stories. I mean, one of them is like not really a story, it's like, the world falling apart. So let's do we're gonna do our
So it's a
scripture,
story, isn't
then
it?
we're gonna talk about Church of England's obsession with net zero for a bit, and then we're gonna talk obviously about Trump and Zelensky and the Ukrainian war,
Hmm.
etc., etc., and all that craziness that's going on. So, should we do our reading? So, this is the reading for the Gospel for Ash Wednesday,
Yep.
which is the first day of Lent, and we're in Lent now, Tom. We can't go
No.
back in time. So, anyone who's listening to this, unless you're listening to it more than 46 days in the future, will be in Lent. So that's why we're doing this to explain to people.
So here we are.
They might be confused. They might think, why are they doing a reading for Lent? It's because it is
Here we are.
Lent. All right.
Here, Matthew 6. Should I read it?
Well, I've got
just,
I've
just
got the David Bentley Hart translation here.
no. Let's not use that.
Why not?
Because he's not right about many things.
We had some David Bentley Hart fans on our YouTube
Did we?
video go mental last time we discussed him.
Sorry, he's another syncretist. Really, he's a universalist. He practices heresies now and spreads them.
I'm not saying anything. I'm literally not saying whether I agree or disagree. All I'm saying is I've read a lot of his books and I quite like some of them. Anyway, carry on.
Right. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people. Jamie, we need to do the Lord's Prayer.
Oh yeah, and
Sorry,
you also need
what's
to
going
say
on?
what the scripture reading is.
Did I not?
I don't think
Okay.
so.
Oh,
Anyway,
let's do the Lord's
I think
Prayer.
we're a bit all over the place today.
Just all over the place.
I think the show's going really well, but I think people will enjoy it. But
Probably.
it's not been very professional so far.
No. All right. Anyway, I wasn't even aware we started actually the whole thing. You just sort of drifted
We definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, just
Good.
sometimes I check. I think,
It just says it at the top.
sometimes
This
I
meeting
think,
is
am I
being recorded.
definitely recording it? I often think that, and I have to check. Anyway, you do the. Shall I do the rules?
Use the Lord's Prayer, and I'll do the reading.
Let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
All right, here we go. So this is Matthew 6, verses 1 to 6. So Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 to 6. In the English Standard Version, ESV. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father, who is in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you.
Good,
There we are.
good reading. Interesting in the David Bentley Hart translation, with he translates whatever the word is for hypocrites as play acting and play actors. It's kind of a slightly different thing, isn't it?
It's an odd choice. I wasn't aware that there was any controversy around the translation of hypocrites. It's basically the same word in Greek as well, isn't it?
I was just about to look it up because I don't have my Greek New Testament next to me, so I'm looking it up now.
I'm pretty certain it's essentially
on the internet. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut the door, pray to thy Father. I'm trying to find it. Where is it? What verse is it? Verse 2. Yeah, in the KJV is definitely translated as hypocrites. Do not sound a trumpet before thee as the hypocrites who hypocritai. You are right, Tom. It does sound like the word hypocrite.
hypocrite.
An interpreter, an actor. It does mean an actor or a stage player.
Yeah, but this is the sort of thing that David Bentley Hart does, isn't it? He just chooses weird, alternatives just to muddy the water rather than to make a sort of clear. I mean,
well, yeah, I know, but it's true that secondary meaning. Well, it actually, what primary meaning is one who answers, and then the secondary one is an actor or a stage player, and it's used in apparently Aristophanes, Xenophon, Plato, Aelian, and Herodian. But yeah, then in biblical Greek, generally a dissembler, pretender, or hypocrite. So
yeah.
but you know what he's saying.
Yeah.
Somebody who's like putting a mask on in order to create an impression.
Yeah, which is what it's all about, isn't it? You should have your faith not to create an impression with other people, but because and this really, I mean, Jesus is goes on later to talk about fasting as well, doesn't he? But practicing your righteousness, praying, giving, fasting, any of those things are there to between you and God, and not to be done in order to gain worldly approval.
Yes.
If you do so, then that is your reward, worldly approval. But
It's
I
quite
quite like
tricky.
that.
Yeah, well, that's it's a classic Jesus rhetoric,
Classic.
isn't it? Classic Jesus is a highlight. I mean, I think everyone agrees that the Sermon on the Mount is a highlight, don't they? But it's difficult, isn't it, when you're a minister in the Lord's church, because you have to do things in public.
Well, I talked about this already, but in a different show.
On our bonus podcast.
On our bonus podcast. But I'll say it again, Jim, because it is important. There is a difference between practicing things in order to be seen by them, in order to gain their praise and reward. And there is a temptation to that as a minister. Don't get me wrong. It's a constant temptation. Oh, I did that well. Oh, they'll all think well of me. But actually, if you do it to lead by example, in a humble way, then that's not hypocrisy. I mean, after all, Jesus prays with his disciples, doesn't he?
Yeah, true. I do see him pray some of the time. He's often going off by himself, though.
He does often go on, but he also prays for. So the great prayers in John 14, for example, are all in the presence of the disciples, isn't it?
High priestly prayer.
Yeah.
Good prayer. No, you're quite right. So that is an important thing, isn't it? During Lent, as well as at other times, we don't practice our righteousness in front of other people to be seen by them, or indeed to sort of measure up to what other people think of what we should be doing. We do it because we are seeking the presence of God. I think another thing is, people can be very scrupulous, can't they? And think, well, I'm not doing enough, or I'm trying to curry God's favor, but that's also
it doesn't work.
No, because we already have God's favor through His grace.
Yeah.
God
you
loves us.
You can't earn anything. You're depraved.
Yeah, I was going for a slightly more positive kind of spin on it. I was going to say, God loves us. He's a compassionate Father. He wants us to draw close to Him.
You can't dig yourself out of the hole.
And Lent is just carry on. Lent is an opportunity that we have to draw near to the Lord in a special way. Through focusing on repentance, Bible reading, yeah. And actually, it's interesting that I don't know historically whether the so-called 3 pillars of Lent actually come from this passage, but it's amazing how specifically Jesus refers to them as almsgiving, prayer, and fasting within the course of the same passage.
And it's interesting. He says when. I always think the most important word in these 3 things is when. It's not if. When you give to the needy, when you pray, and when you fast, there's the expectation is set up. That, I mean, again, we don't do it to earn anything, because our works are in vain if we're trying to earn righteousness with them. They are pleasing to God if we do them with dwelling in His grace, but they don't earn us anything. But we do need to cultivate holy habits, because they do us good. So giving away our from richness, our riches to others, praying for ourselves and for others, and fasting, self-discipline. Yeah.
Very true. I feel like I was going to say something else about that, but it's gone from my mind now. No, it's fine.
I shouldn't have been looking at Twitter. Yeah.
No, I wasn't looking at Twitter. I was listening to your wisdom.
Thank you.
There's something about all of this stuff. Oh yeah, this is the interesting thing. Is in the New Testament. All right, so Christ says all this stuff, but there's not very much technique. You notice that, like about fasting, like when Christ says when you pray, when you fast. For example. He never says like this is how to fast. Now in this passage here. Or it's not actually in this passage, but obviously he teaches the Lord's Prayer, which is a kind of technique. And specifically, he teaches the Lord's Prayer in Luke as a response to the disciples who say, teach us how to pray. But it's interesting to me how the actual method of prayer, fasting and almsgiving is not laid down in the New Testament. So it's like a principle. It's like these things are good things to do. You ought to do them in the spiritual life in that sense. But how you do them, it's not actually said, is it? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I like. But then that's where we can sort of turn to the wisdom of some who of the great sort of spiritual Christian spiritual men over the and women over the centuries who've given us I think some good clues of healthy and helpful practice. So John Wesley's a good one, isn't he? The Wesleyan fasting diet on Wednesday and Friday.
And
it's not like it's not like Islamic fasting where it's mandated. If it's helpful to you, do it. But find some way of fasting from food. Go hungry for a bit and offer it to God. I'm useless at this because I get really hungry and then I can't function. But you try to have basically it's having a light breakfast and then waiting to eat until the evening, isn't it? It's the key. For Wesley, that's what he used to do anyway. So skip
is that
lunch.
right? Yeah, I don't know. It's good way of doing it for sure. And of course, you can pass other things apart from food.
You can, but I think Jesus generally is talking about food, and I mean, I think we should be careful about over spiritualizing it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Jimmy. Yes, it's fine. We can take a general sort of more general view of it, but I think Jesus is quite clear that he's expecting people to look a bit wan and weak, and so therefore,
I think food is definitely the main one for sure, but I think it's also. I do think it's a genuinely very helpful spiritual practice to fast other things at times, particularly if one is addicted to something.
So I think I'm pretty certain I can say this because Daniel's posted it publicly on X, but he's left X for a month, hasn't he?
Yeah. He didn't say he was addicted to it, but
no, I'm not saying he was addicted to it.
That's like a way of even if you're not addicted to something like social media, it gets in your brain, doesn't it? And it kind of affects your view of things. It's just a way of sort of cleansing yourself almost. Or many people give up certain types of food and drink during Lent as well. Sweet food or meat or alcohol or whatever it might be. Have a simpler diet. All of this stuff. I think it's I think the principle is about recognizing the things that you're reliant on and just trying to scale back. It kind of takes you off autopilot, makes you think about the things of God more, makes you think about prayer more, and makes you less reliant on the things of the world. That's the way I put it, just as a kind of principle.
Absolutely.
So anyway, there we go. There's quite a lot of stuff there. I'm sure we've shared loads of spiritual wisdom there, Tom, for people to chew on.
Yep.
Speaking of deep spiritual wisdom, let's move on to some stories. Oh, by the way, there was sorry about that. I live next to a main road and there's a ambulance going past or something. I did actually forget a notice. I don't know why I bother writing these notices down because I always forget them. I am going to. So you'll recall, Tom, because you will recall that we started an Irreverend Substack where I've posted a few articles.
I do recall this, yeah.
So basically, I've decided what I'm going to do on that Substack. I've decided what I'm going to do. I am going to make that Substack a subscription possible Substack as well, to use a technical phrase. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the same stuff that I put on, the same bonus stuff that I put on our Patreon account, I'm going to put that on Substack as well. So I'm going to put our Uncollared bonus podcast, and I'm going to put any other bonus podcasts that are just for subscribers on Substack, and I'm going to release the episodes early on Substack as well, just like on Patreon. So now people can support us by becoming patrons for the low price of £1.50 plus VAT in the UK per month if you go on our website, revenpod.com. But if you want to subscribe to us on Substack, which means you'll get our articles and you'll get all the other stuff as well. Articles are free, by the way, but you'll get all the other stuff as well. You can do that by going on irreverendpod.substack.com, and that's £5 a month. So you can do either now, and I'll leave a link in the show notes as always. So you can join us on Patreon to support the show. We need the money. I live off the money. We use it to fund the show.
Do you still buy a coffee? You've not said about buy a coffee.
Yeah, buy me a coffee as well. Buy me a coffee. Which
we've got because we haven't got that much on today. Have we got any buy me a coffee comments to read through?
Probably.
Just wondering.
We might do. I haven't actually.
Let's do this. No, that's right.
It's
fine.
Yeah, if I can get it up, I'll have a look. But we do. I mean, people leave very nice.
Yeah, they're very. It's good. It's good to have messages.
Very nice. But if you want to buy us a coffee, you can do so on the same place, revenpod.com, our website. Click on the big yellow button. But we do rely on the money. I live off my earnings from writing and podcasting, so I do need it. So it's really helpful.
I got someone said you shouldn't say that. I can't remember, one of my aunts or something said, why should we give him money? And I said, well, because he needs it to live on. And also, there are loads of costs as well, aren't there? There's like server costs and equipment costs.
Sorry,
And,
can we just go back to that? Why should they give us money?
well, she thought you just like, you didn't need the money. I was like, he doesn't, you realize he doesn't actually have an income, and he just gets a house. And so to be clear, like we part of his job is irreverent, effectively.
Yeah, it's my job. I mean, it's my main source of income, along with my Substack, jamiefranklin.substack.
And your book released next week.
Book. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, unless it sells really well, which would be great. But I think there is a principle here, Tom. It's like we're putting this stuff out for free, aren't we? It's like Peter Hitchens says. It's like, well, if you object to there being a paywall, well, your coffee's behind a paywall. It's like the majority of stuff that we do is just free. This is free now. We're just doing this for free, but we also have to finance it as well. So there is a genuine need. Anyway, let's turn now to. We're going to start before we get into all the Trump stuff. We thought we'd have a little bit of light-hearted relief by talking about the Church of England's Shrove Tuesday communications. Tom,
oh, wow, yeah, is it exhorting people to a good Lent? Is it talking about how they can celebrate the day of reflection and the pre-fasting, sort of the last feast?
Interestingly, the Church of England comms department decided not to mention Shrove Tuesday at all in the video that they released yesterday, and instead, let's listen to some of it. Do
we have to? Oh, I guess we do have to. But go on them.
And feel free to, if you want me to pause at any point. Here we go.
Climate change is having a devastating effect on communities all over the world, especially the poorest countries.
Go on, Tom.
Is it though?
I think that this needs fact checking, to be honest with you, because I don't really believe
devastating effect.
The thing is, as well, is when they say climate change, the question is it anthropogenic climate change? Is it something that we can do anything about, or is it just a natural occurrence? That's the key question, isn't it?
I mean, it's obviously quite possibly a bit of both, Jamie. But the point is it actually having currently a devastating effect on communities around the world? There's some claims there. I don't think reality stacks up. I mean, weather's having an effect. Weather's always had an effect,
Interesting. There are 779 comments on this video, by the way, and I don't think any of them are positive.
Okay. Anyway, so that's the first thing. Like, actually, the claim that it's currently, right now, a small amount of purported warming around the world is having a, quote, devastating effect on communities around the world. It's dubious, isn't it? It's really dubious. But go on.
Yeah.
Climate change is having a devastating effect on communities all over the world, especially the poorest countries and poorest people. By tackling climate change, we support our local mission and witness to our communities that we are people who care about climate justice, now and for the future. That's why the Church of England has set an
So we're not even, this isn't tackling climate change. How would you tackle climate change?
You tackle it like an invisible mugger, Tom. Boris Johnson,
like Boris Johnson, like tackling someone on the football pitch. Yeah, I mean, it's just, even if what they say is true, what they're about to claim, because it's going to talk about zero carbon Church of England for 2030 or whatever, 1930 is not going to make any difference, because our carbon output is minute compared to, say, even this country, and this country is less than 1% of the world. It's not going to make any difference. Sorry,
it's not going to make any difference, is it?
We're not tackling it. We're just impoverishing, already beleaguered congregations by shoving a load of legislation down their throats that forces them to have expensive heating. So we're going to have. I'm going to rant about this now. We're going to have a heat pump attached to our church's heating system in order to reduce our carbon emissions. There's no way around it. We're just going to probably have to. And it's not a great thing to have in a church like ours, because it's, the building has 11th century, 9th century, 12th century, 13th century, and 18th century and 19th century bits to it, none of which are, built with energy efficiency in mind. So heat pumps don't really work very well. So it's just going to be enormously expensive. So not only is it going to be expensive to put in, increase the capital costs of the project, it's also going to be expensive to run because it's inherently more expensive to run a heat pump in an inefficient building than it is to run a nice, gas boiler. So, because they're more expensive, because electricity is more expensive than gas.
Yeah.
So all in all, what they're doing is costing us probably about £50,000 up front, and then probably a few £100 a year. And do you know what? We don't need that. We're already in deficit. I'm trying to turn a church around. I'm trying to make sure we've got a warm, inviting space with toilets. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And they're doing this to us.
They give some tips about that later on, Tom.
Do they? What? Turn off the heating?
Warm the people, not the building.
Yeah. But that sounds great until you realise that it costs £70,000 just to put in the infrared stuff that they're talking about, and also, we can put in pew heaters. Well, I want all my pews out. Ideally, I don't like pews very much.
I don't get rid of pews.
No, they're horrible.
Error.
Woodworm and rotten, and they just need to go.
Slightly different issue, I suppose. Yeah.
So the whole kind of why don't you put heaters on the pews or heated cushions? It doesn't make any sense. So you want flexible seating.
Why don't you get seats with heaters inside them, Tom? That sounds good. You could have smart heaters, and
also
you could control the temperature of people's seats from the front.
I don't know if anyone's ever noticed what happens if they turn the heating off of their house. They stop warming their house. Do you know what happens, Jamie? Mold happens, condensation, dampness. Do you know what that isn't good for? Church fittings.
Yeah, and also just people enjoying being in church.
Yeah, I mean, they might be warm, but the whole thing stinks of mold. Yeah. I mean, great. Thanks, Church of England. Can I not listen to any more of this? It's just nonsense.
No, there's loads.
Please, I'll get angry. I'm going to get angry.
Another 2 minutes. This is a major part of the show, Tom. We can't stop doing that. Here we go. There's a bit I want to comment on in a minute, and I'm just going to roll it back just a tiny bit. Right, here we go.
Local mission and witness to our communities that we are poorest countries and poorest people. By tackling climate change, we support our local mission and witness to our communities that we are people who care about climate justice.
All right, that's what I wanted to comment on, the bit we've already heard. So to me, this actually connects well with the reading that we've just had about practicing your righteousness before other people. Like they say, this helps our mission. So number one, does it? I mean, how does it help our mission? If our mission is to spread the gospel, make disciples of all nations, I don't really see how it helps our mission. I think it actually hinders our mission in the way that you were just talking about, Tom, because it makes our buildings more expensive and uninhabitable. But secondly, this thing about it shows our communities. What does she say? It's a witness to our community that we care about climate justice. I think that just sums it up, really, doesn't it? This is just pure virtue signaling to the culture around. It's us attempting to look righteous to other people, just like the Pharisees who prayed on the street corners, who disfigured their faces so their righteous deeds could be paraded in front of other people. That's what this is. That's why this is such a disaster. Ultimately, it's a PR disaster for the Church of England, because everyone can see this and everyone can see through it, which is that this is virtue signaling. Everyone thinks, even people who are not Christians think that we should be doing Christian things, but instead we're wasting our time making stupid videos with plasticine models talking about climate change. And I have to say another thing about this as well, just while I'm on it, and I'm not being sexist and I'm not being racist, but a part of this is the ethnicity of these plasticine figures. And I know you can't see them, but so far there have been 3 plasticine figures. And as I say, I'm not saying this because I'm a white supremacist or anything like that, but none of them are white, and they're all various different skin colors. And the vicar is a black woman. Now, I'm not saying I've got anything against black people or anything against women. I'm just saying it's all part of the same thing. This virtue signaling, identity politics, climate change farce, which is what this is. Anyway, let's listen to more of this.
Now and for the future. That's why the Church of England has set an ambitious target to reach net zero carbon by 2030. One of the ways we can tackle climate change...
All right, we've done like 27 seconds so far.
I know. It's also an impossible target. It's not going to happen.
30 thing. Oh, of course it's not. I mean, that's in 5 years.
So that's what, 5 years time. My church isn't going to be carbon neutral because I don't care. It's going to still emit some carbon.
Is this? I was thinking about this. What's the kind of? Is there any legislative? underpinning of this? Was this something that General?
Well, the only legislative underpinning is that when you replace heating in a church, have to take account of a load of purportedly green technologies before.
Okay, but there's no legislation saying that we have to decarbonize by 2030.
They can't make us do that. We're independent charities,
right?
And the building's invested in the incumbent.
Okay.
What can they make you do? Anyway, for every church that decarbonizes, I'm going to burn 4 logs a year.
Nice.
In my
You should make a counter propaganda video to this.
Yeah.
Is through reducing the carbon we release from our buildings into the atmosphere. The journey to net zero carbon will be different for each church. All our churches are unique in their size, and what works for one church may not work for another.
Solar panels in one of these images, which were made in China by one of their millions of coal-fired power plants.
How long we take to get there will be different for everyone. That's okay.
Never.
You can make a start by using the Church of England's Energy Footprint tool to see where you stand.
I won't.
You could ask a local expert to carry out an energy audit to figure out what to tackle
great, isn't it? Like the way they say you could do this, you could do that. It's like, do you think we've got the time to do this? Like all these plasticine figures, they all look really happy. But like, it's not happy. Like, as anyone who knows like what administrating a church is actually like, having more admin to do doesn't make you happy. It makes you stressed. And like, you could get a local expert to come round and do some kind of carbon check. Well, yeah, I could, but I could do one of the 1,000 other things I've got to do, because why
would I spend? Because he'll want money for it, and I once again have to spend more money on someone who's going to tell me how to spend even more money.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? Like these people at the centre, they say, you could do this. Well, are you going to pay for it? Are you going to give us some of the 11 billion pounds that you've got to pay for any of this? Oh, no, actually, you're just going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to pay for it out of your own funds. Well, I'm sorry, but we don't have the money for it. I mean, Tom, would you be happy? Let me ask you this. Would you be happy if the church commissioners gave you, say, £200,000? Would you be happy to spend it to decarbonise your church?
No, I'd spend it on mission.
Okay, well, there you go. But they could at least offer, couldn't they? They could say, and we're making £200,000 available for every parish church.
Literally, if they said you can have
sorry, you Carol.
No, honestly, if they said you can have £200,000 and you must spend it on carbon neutral stuff, I would say I'd find as many ways as possible to make tangential things apply to carbon neutral the way you do with all these grants. We'll have a composting toilet or something. I want a toilet so we can just have it composting. Is that carbon neutral now? So and you can pay for that
in your church, which is as you know, Tom. As you know, having human beings in the church is it makes you a carbon emitter, especially if they're doing poos in the church.
Yeah.
Anyway, not to be crass, but that's the thing that annoys me so much is that we're going to be carbon neutral. It's like, well, that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. Overall, it's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds, potentially even billions of pounds for the Church of England, and you're not going to make any of your 11 billion pounds available for us. So,
or sensors to your lighting and heating controls to avoid wasting energy when no one's around. And if you can, try switching to a 100% renewable electricity plan to help reduce your carbon footprint instantly. Take time to fix any broken windows.
And again, here you've got the vicar. She's smiling. There's a crack in one of the windows. She's smiling. She's actually repairing it herself.
Insulate pipes.
Nice.
And draft-proof doors.
All of these things require faculties. These idiots, are recommend. I mean, don't get me wrong. They require money and faculties, and all of this, is admin and expense
and money and permission.
And money, and also the energy goes out the roof because we've got a barn.
Yeah. Because I mean, literally with these
crack in the window,
with these images of the pipes being insulated, they're literally putting some of that foam stuff around pipes, as though that's going to make a difference.
Well, it probably would make a small amount of difference, but I've got all my pipes are visible in the church, so they're not going to allow us to put foam all over them. It looks ugly.
Yeah, of course,
stupid.
Of course.
Right, go on.
It's almost over.
Keep heating.
Good.
And don't forget to consider the impact these changes may have on the wildlife within and around your church.
Yes.
Creatures like bats may call your church home too. Even if your
Goodness, no,
church is
keep 'em
only
out.
open a few days a week, small changes
Big bat.
can
Honestly,
make a
have you
big
ever heard of a big
difference.
bat? Stop there. So big bat. Like bats are massive money raiser, as far as I can tell. Like you have to. So I've got a friend down the road who's having some work done to his house, and he's literally had to pay twice now because the certification ran out. This Bat UK company had to pay for people to come in and sit down and count the bats in and out of their house, which was 0, as it happens both times. But even so, that wasn't enough. The big bat has so much power that they then forced them to install a bat hotel in the roof, even though there were no bats in there.
It's ridiculous. It's crazy.
You know,
Yeah, and this is
you do not want bats in your church. If you have bats in your church, just pray they leave, because getting rid of them is a nightmare. You're not allowed to, and then you have to take them into account when you want to do anything. So, I pray regularly that bats stay away from my church, stay out of it, keep away. Don't want you.
They're like demons, aren't they? They should be exorcised. I mean, this is delusional, isn't it? Think, be careful of the wildlife, and also you might have bats. So think about that. Think about the changes. Think about the effect it's going to have on the bats, right? As though you didn't have enough to think about already, Vickers. Think about the bats.
The bats. It's batty, Jamie.
Carbon
it's batty.
neutral. It's net zero. Think about the bats. Right.
Keep in mind, it's often more efficient to heat the people, not the entire building. And if your gas boiler is nearing the end of its life, plan for a low-carbon replacement heating system. This could be a heat pump.
Heat pump.
If your church is busy and has high energy use, consider green solutions.
I thought you were going to say consider shutting down. If your church is busy and has high energy use, consider sending all the people away.
Shutting down, empty it. Yeah, the best thing that would achieve zero carbon in the Church of England is for the church to completely crumble in the next 5 years. No people, no buildings, no worship.
Exactly.
Yeah,
If you happen to be busy, then let me tell you how to ruin your church and destroy the congregation as quickly as possible. Install a heat pump so it's freezing during the winter months and nobody wants to come.
Like solar panels or heat pumps.
Oh, look, they've got a cathedral with solar panels all over the roof. I mean, that would just
right. Never going to happen.
Get a faculty for that.
The journey will be different for everyone, so it's important to get expert advice, including input from your diocesan advisory committee.
The AC.
Our hope is that by 2030, our churches will be bright, warm and welcoming, consuming much
They'll be
less
cold
energy and emitting
and
less
damp
carbon.
and empty
And mouldy. And
Mouldy.
full of bats.
Full of bats and
But
other
at least
wildlife.
the bats
at
have
least it'll be
taken
carbon
over.
neutral. Yeah.
And than they do now. And that will be good for the people in our churches and good for the whole of creation.
Yeah.
Make no difference to them, and the people will be cold and bored. Do you know what? I hate everything about that.
I do as well. China is making 1 to 2 coal-fired power stations a week. It's not going to make any difference if you emit slightly less carbon.
So it's over. It's just over. The whole thing's over.
If it's real, which I don't believe it is, then there's nothing that we can do about it. Literally nothing. So this is, as I say, Tom, this is virtue signaling. This is the fact that whoever's behind this either has no understanding what Christianity is, or has completely lost their confidence in the message of the Christian faith, and instead of actually preaching the gospel, now is a supplicant to the religion of net zero and climate change. And it's very sad to see. It's an embarrassment. You see all these people. Where's the Shrove Tuesday post? Tomorrow's Ash Wednesday. What will you post then? Lent starts tomorrow, a really difficult journey for Christians. Today we look to the church for encouragement and guidance. Instead, we get a lecture about net zero. We're not interested in this nonsense. Somebody has written, what about some tips on pancakes? So according to the Church of England, the omnipotent architect of the cosmos somehow fashioned a world so feeble that it cannot withstand climate change. So you'll find admitting that you no longer worship Christ, but globalism.
So this has been highly ratioed, isn't it? It looks like to me.
Well, so 722, 729, 779 comments, 57.
57.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
It's been viewed 500,000 times. And yeah,
It's got 57 likes after 500,000 times being viewed.
that's very bad, isn't it? How many is
It's
that?
awful.
500,000 views, 57 likes. That's like one in, what is that? Is that 1 in 5,000 views? Is that right? Am I right there? Or is that?
Not even, I mean, there's probably more committed eco-loons than that in the world. You know, it's really bad.
I know it's really bad, isn't it? It's very embarrassing. Hang on, I'm just going to do this. 500,000 divided by
57.
57. Oh, it's very bad. I don't know what I was thinking. It's 1 in 87,790. So basically, you have to have 87,719 people watch this video for one person to like it. That's shocking, isn't it?
It's pretty dreadful. Anyway, should we end with Mark Dyer's Climate Apostles Creek? It's very funny, and should we do it?
You read it. It's not a massive story. Don't say we're going to end. We're about to do.
That's the bigger story. And this section. Go
for it.
Thank you, Mark, for sending this in. We have to do a proper sort of Church of England vicar voice. I believe in climate change, the ideology almighty, destroyer of heaven and earth. I believe in the climate committee. I'm not going to say that on a family show. Our dictator. I guess it's probably right.
It's fine. It's not a rude word.
Not
in this context.
Do you not think so? Okay. Well,
it's a perfectly normal word.
Okay.
It just means an illegitimate child.
I know. It's probably being used in a slightly bad way, isn't it? I'd say. I believe in the climate committee, its bastard son, our dictator, which was conceived by the globalist communists, born of the Frankfurt School, continued under the Davos set, was promulgated, imposed, and inserted into law. It descended into farce. When this happened, they moved the goalposts. Those who opposed climate change became evil, whilst we are seated on the right side of history, from whence we will judge between the right, evil, and the good. I believe in only one science, the communion of climate change scientists, the total destruction of those who disagree, the constant rise in energy prices, and the grift everlasting. Amen.
Very good, Tom. You read that very well. By the way, I need to do an apologia. I've realized that I totally messed up the stats on that video. It's actually 8,771 people. So I'm going to the stats show that 8,771 people need to watch this before
one person
person likes it. Yeah, that's how bad it is. I'm going to tweet that, and I'm going to quote tweet. I think that's going to get a lot of likes, to be honest with you.
Yep.
In fact, it'd be good if my thing got more likes than theirs, wouldn't it?
Come on, Reverend. That won't be hard at the moment.
Come on, give us some likes. Give us more than 57 likes, and then we'll get it. All right, let's talk about Trump, shall we? Yeah. Now that we've absolutely smashed that, Tom, we smashed that, and we've got 13 minutes left to talk about Trump. Now, all sorts of things have happened this week. I mean, it is really serious what's going on. We've been talking about all kinds of stuff, but really, there's a crisis in the world, isn't there? So, talking points. Let's just go through it just quickly. So, what's happened this week? So, Keir Starmer, did the most sycophantic visit to the US imaginable, which, to be honest, is probably what he should have done. Handed Trump a letter from the King. Trump loved it. Love that guy, love the king. Then there was the massive apocalyptic face-off bust-up between Trump, Vance, and Zelenskyy in the Oval Office. Tom, you must have seen at least some of it. Did you?
I've seen images and read reports. I've actually seen it.
You haven't watched it? It's shocking, Tom. I have to describe it to you. You must.
Well, no, I know what happened. I know. So Trump and they was there to sort of do the signing of the minerals agreement, wasn't it? And then Vance essentially said that you've been not being grateful enough here, Zelenskyy.
That's right? Those things definitely happen, but it's not.
And then Zelenskyy
let's just bring people up to date from where we are. Then yesterday, as we record, JD Vance made some comments in an interview where he said that it was a better guarantee for Ukraine to have a minerals deal with the US than to have 20,000 soldiers from some random country that hasn't fought a war for 30 or 40 years. And many people got on their high horse and thought he was referring to Britain. And then Trump
we can't even have 20 or 30,000 people.
Yeah, then Trump addressed Congress last night with, I haven't watched the whole thing, but I've seen some clips.
But between that, the US have declared they're going to stop their support for the Ukraine war, haven't they?
So I missed this bit out. It is here. So they said they're going to pull support, and Zelensky has come back to the negotiating table, and then Trump has done his triumphant address to Congress, having completely called Ukraine in Europe's bluff. I suppose the other thing to say is that Zelensky, after the Oval Office bust-up, went to this European leaders summit, and they said, "Oh, we're behind you. We're going to support you and help you." But then the US said they're going to pull out, and Zelensky's had to come back because Trump is the master of the deal. Tom, Trump knows he's got all the cards.
So the latest thing. Have you seen the latest thing that the US have stopped all intelligence sharing with Ukraine?
Okay, so they've done that as well. Yeah. They're playing a strong hand. So Tom, let me tell you about the Oval Office bust-up. And this is obviously a very controversial thing, but I did watch the whole thing, and I've taken an interest in it. It was about the most, it was very, very exciting. Let me put it this way. At the end of it, Trump made this joke where he said, "Oh, this is going to make great TV." But essentially, it was kind of like 40 minutes of tension followed by a kind of explosion. And, my reading of it is that basically Zelensky, he was there, I think he was there ostensibly to sign the mineral agreement, so America would have this deal with the Ukraine where they would harvest some of their minerals, and that they would have an economic and physical presence in Ukraine and take some of the money that would make the US money, pay back some of the money that they've spent fighting the Ukraine war, financing the Ukraine war, and it would also provide security for Ukraine because they would have an American presence in Ukraine, and it would make it less likely that Russia would invade again. Trump wants to strike a deal with Russia. Clearly, Trump's view is that there have to be compromises on both sides. He said that in the press conference itself. Now, this is where it gets controversial. My view is that all the way through, from the very beginning, Zelensky was undermining Trump, because it was really obvious through his body language and through what Zelensky was saying that he was not interested in any kind of compromise whatsoever. He said there can be no compromise at one point. I'm fairly sure he said Putin would have to pay reparations. He said no territory would be given to Putin.
It's pie in the sky, isn't it? Pie in the sky.
Well, yeah, of course it is. And
they're losing the war.
Yeah, and this can't carry on forever. Apart from anything else, like Trump just doesn't want to fund it, and he's been elected on a massive mandate, and he's saying he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. So anyway, it was all very tense. Zelensky kind of shaking his head whilst Trump was speaking and everything like that. And then the bit where it gets even more controversial is that JD Vance then comes in and he does this speech about how Biden's policy was wrong, and we can't just thump our chests and carry on with this. We have to be diplomatic, and we have to have a negotiated peace. And it's at that point then that Zelensky says, he basically starts cross-examining JD Vance and saying Putin didn't, he's broken his word many, many times with us. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about? And then there's this back and forth where it starts to get heated. Zelensky says to JD Vance, "Have you ever been to Ukraine?" JD Vance then accuses Zelensky of doing propaganda tours when people come around and having problems conscripting people, which I think seems like it's true. And then the point where it really kicks off, Tom, is where Zelensky starts saying, "You've got a big ocean between you and Russia, but if you don't do something about it, you will feel it." At which point Trump starts going, "Don't start telling us what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good. You're not in a position to dictate that. You're not in a position to dictate that." And then basically they're kind of talking over each other a lot. I think at this point Vance isn't really involved anymore. It becomes about Zelensky and Trump. And then it basically kind of gets more and more intense until Trump sort of utters the immortal line about I think he says, "You've got really bad cards." I think that's what he says. I think he said, "You've got really bad cards here." And then Zelensky says, "I'm not playing cards." And then Trump basically at one point shouts over him. He says, You're gambling with people's lives. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And that's like that's the famous line. And that was really that was the bit at which it all exploded. But one of the things that was so amazing about the whole thing is that it didn't end. Trump carried on taking questions in the press after it had kicked off. So there were further questions about the whole thing. I mean, unless I'm misremembering, I'm sure that happened. And then it went on for like 10 minutes. The blow up essentially, and yeah, it was extraordinary. I mean, it absolutely was extraordinary. My personal view is that I don't think anyone really came out of it particularly well, but and it kind of comes down to what we've talked about many times, Tom. For me, anyway, is that people are saying, oh, they're bullying Zelensky, or Zelensky was being rude, or oh, sorry, they were being rude to Zelensky, or whatever it is. But honestly, I just think that my view on this is that if you are not on the side that genuinely desires this war to end and people to stop dying, and you really want to see this war propagated, then I think that there is something seriously, seriously wrong. If I'm honest with that, if I'm honest with you, because this war can't be won by Ukraine. The only way it could conceivably be won, or the only way, let's put it like this, the only way that Russia could conceivably lose is if this turns into a world war, a nuclear conflict, which engulfs the earth.
And if everyone loses, it's game theory.
If that's what you want, then I think that is actually psychopathic.
Yeah.
I think that is, and I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand, why does Zelensky want to propagate the war? Is it because he doesn't? Is it because I mean, there's talk. There was that Tucker Carlson episode about this guy, chronicling his persecution in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Is there a load of corrupt stuff going on in Ukraine that Zelensky doesn't want to be found out about? Is it just he wants to keep his hold on power? Does he like being a kind of?
I don't know. I think I can see. Like, without wanting to cast, I don't think we need to cast any moral kind of aspersions at Zelensky. I mean, they may be true. It's a very corrupt place, but it's quite reasonable to try and defend your country. But one of the principles, and I think I said this 3 years ago when the war started, of a just war is that it's achievable. It's an achievable war. And I said then, and I stand by it, that I fear this war has not got achievable aims, and so therefore cannot ever be won. And therefore, all you're going to do by not surrendering is just feed tens of thousands of young men into the meat grinder of war, and that's what we've seen happening. Because the sort of, if we take a sort of set of reasonable assumptions here. So the first one being, Russia invaded immorally. I won't say illegally, because the concept of international law is nonsense. I mean, who's making this law? It's just if Russia want to break their international agreements, it's not law, is it? You have no right to make law in Russia, no more than they have any right to make the law here. But the Russia invaded immorally and wrongly, and they invaded because partly to do with a sort of greater Russian empire building project, and partly because the promises from NATO to move into Ukraine were red lines for them. They were, just into geopolitics. We know that Russia had a big base in Sevastopol, and we know that Russia considers the Donbas regions to be Russian, effectively. They're Russian majority ethnically anyway. So Russia invaded wrongly, in my view. But the West supporting Ukraine were never capable of giving the sufficient support to Ukraine to enable them to turn Russia around and defeat them, without essentially committing to the point where Russia would consider it to be naked aggression from the West against Russia, which is something we try and avoid because it leads to potential nuclear exchanges, right? So the West were never able to give enough support to Ukraine for them to win. All they've been able to do is promulgate the suffering, and kept it going for longer than it needed to. At which point our funding of this war is actually immoral ourselves. Like, all we're doing is causing more destruction than is necessary for the same result. So, like 2 years ago, it's fairly well understood that Boris Johnson went to. There were some potential peace talks happening, and Russia were not in anywhere near as good a place as they are now. And Boris Johnson famously flew to Kiev and persuaded Ukraine not to pursue peace. And this is where we are: another 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people dead. And all in all, at this point, it needs to end, and it needs to end soon before another 12 months of devastating fighting and another, 300 miles of Ukraine is lost. They're only going to get into a weaker place. So I think, and the other thing is like the Ukrainian war can only happen because of American largesse, and Trump wants to stop that. And so the reality has changed on the ground. Like they have to stop.
The American people want to stop it. That's the thing.
Yeah, they voted
Trump in. So this is the thing. I think people so mistaken in our country, this kind of Trump derangement syndrome, which is driven by our media. It's like people are saying, "Oh, look, Trump is doing this." It's not Trump. He has been voted in on an enormous democratic mandate to do this, and he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. Do you take my point though, Tom, about like it doesn't really matter to me, Vance and Trump are bullying Zelensky. I was like, well, okay, well that's in some ways that's kind of an interesting criticism of them, but to me it doesn't really matter. What matters is the fact that thousands of people are dying in this war every week, and that the war needs to stop, and it doesn't turn into a nuclear war. I sort of think, well, okay, so they may have been slightly rude to him, and they probably shouldn't have done that, and it was probably not the best thing overall in terms of negotiating. But really, in the grand scheme of things, really, who cares? The most important thing is that this conflict, which could turn into a nuclear conflict, ends immediately. Going on about, oh, Trump is rude. I just think, well, probably everyone is rude in those kind of circumstances. You just don't normally see it. That's the thing.
I saw an article about comparing this to when America pulled out of Vietnam, which in some ways are quite similar kind of concepts, in a way. And
well, America had troops in Vietnam, so it's quite different.
Yeah, but they pulled out, and basically Vietnam were told to accept whatever the peace, basically on bad terms of peace. They were just told they had to do it. The president at the time even threatened to have literally on the phone, threatened to have the South Vietnamese president assassinated.
Yeah,
that's hardball, isn't it? Trump's just doing the difference between this and Trump is that Trump does it sat in front of the world's media, which is quite interesting. Really, you see it.
I mean, I just find the response, the kind of Trump derangement thing. I literally can't understand it. The only thing I can think is that people are blinded by their hatred of Trump to the seriousness of this situation. I'm not saying that Trump is a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination, but he's right in this situation. He's 100% correct, in my opinion. And I don't even think that really anything that JD Vance said was wrong. I think it may have been slightly injudicious to say it in the circumstance, but was anything he said wrong? Was anything he said actually factually inaccurate? I don't think so. And
possibly about numbers of how much America compared to Europe is funded, but
do you mean in his? I'm talking about in the Oval Office.
Okay, right, yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about the interview, but in the Oval Office, he didn't really say anything that was disagreeable, or that was factually incorrect. So to me, it's and it's been a few days since I've thought about it quite a lot, because I'm thinking quite a lot of people I respect are really down on JD Vance and Trump for their behavior in the Oval Office. But honestly, I find it hard to see. I think it was an argument that just got out of hand in front of the media, and that was the strange thing. I mean, just as an example, and I'm not saying this is somebody whose opinions I respect nowadays, because I think he's gone a bit crazy, but like John Milbank, the professor of theology, who is in many ways a great theologian, he's just gone off the deep end. I mean, he's literally going on about like how we're going to have to all fight against Russia.
Right. This is the same people seem to be saying that Russia is nearly beaten in Ukraine and needs to be, and just Ukraine needs to be supported a little bit more, and at the same time say that Russia is about to take over the whole of Europe. It's like, well, both these things cannot be true.
Well, that's a good point, actually, isn't it? They can't be true at the same time. So,
so it's nonsense. Like, we're not going to be fighting Russia. We should try not to fight Russia.
Well, we shouldn't fight them at all. What business have we being involved in a war with Russia, Tom. I just can't, like, if people from, like, can you imagine, like, if people from our nation start dying because of this conflict? Like, and this is the thing I think that people haven't reckoned with. I don't think people who are advocating for more war actually can understand how awful and terrible war actually is. We're talking about people being killed, like dying, young people having their bodies torn to shreds by bullets and cities being blown up. And surely anything is preferable. I mean, not anything, but like in this circumstance, like any kind of, compromise over some territory in Ukraine, vastless tracts of land in Ukraine, surrendering some of it to end the war, to prevent a nuclear war, a global nuclear conflict. I mean, sometimes when I'm looking at this stuff this week, it's felt like I wonder whether, I mean, obviously it's a completely different situation now, but in the run up to the First World War, it must have felt quite similar when people were like losing their heads and they're just losing perspective and they have no idea about what they are potentially getting themselves into by being so undiplomatic about things. It's like just focus on ending the war, and focus on it not becoming a nuclear conflict. Surely that's got to be a number one priority for absolutely everyone. It's like, oh, Trump is rude, Trump is brash. I mean, who cares? I mean, it's an irrelevance. Millions of people could die as a result of these situations. So that's my view on it. I think we're fairly similar on this now, Tom. I think we were a bit slightly different, weren't we, in the beginning? But now I've come down to your way of thinking about this.
Thank you.
You were right, Tom. I wouldn't say I was wrong. That would be going too far. But
look, it would have been lovely if Ukraine had the power to throw Russia out. Okay, it would have been lovely. But practically speaking, Russia's much bigger, has a much bigger military, has the potential to cause worldwide devastation with nuclear weapons, and was fighting. And have a long history of sort of high intensity, high casualty contact, and with, a steely-eyed Putin behind him. I mean, it'd have been great if Ukraine could have managed it. I just couldn't see how then, and I can't see how now,
Yeah, I think the thing is that people push back on this kind of thing. So, for example, somebody who I quite respect the other day said to me that he thinks that they should have just allowed Russia to invade and take over, and that would have been the best thing to do. And obviously, that's an opinion that you're basically not allowed to have.
I think it'd be better for Ukraine if they'd capitulated 3 days after and given up the Donbass or something. Actually, yes, it'd be better for all of the young men who've been destroyed.
Yeah, it would have been better for all the families. I mean, because ultimately we're talking about a change of government, aren't we? All right, and people say, well, it's not democratic and blah 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 and all these kind of things. But that's what it comes back to. It comes back to ideals and values, and the liberal way of thinking about this, which is very much redolent of the response that we see internationally in Europe, particularly, is that we have to oppose Russia because they are contradicting our values, because they're contradicting our democratic values. And but
in Russia, you can protest abortion and not get locked up.
Well, yeah, indeed.
What values are we talking about?
That's exactly right. So it goes back to what JD Vance was saying about our biggest enemy being ourselves in this sense. But even so, a more conservative way of thinking about it is, well, actually, it's not up to us to impose our values on the rest of the world. The rest of the world can have different values as far as we're concerned. We have our values; they have their values. Allow them to work it out between them. And it's not to say, that means you never get involved in anything internationally, but it is to say that you have a slightly, a very much less interventionist perspective on foreign conflicts, and which we haven't had because we've constantly got involved in Iraq, Afghanistan, various other places, and it's because we think that we should be imposing our values on the rest of the world, and that's, in my opinion, an incredibly terrible thing to think. It's a terrible mistake to think that it's worth starting international conflicts in order to impose abstract values on other nations. It's disastrous, and it could lead us into another war. It could lead us into a nuclear war this time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. When it boils down to it, I'd rather Russia. It boiled down to it, I'd rather Russia ruled the entirety of Europe than be in a nuclear war situation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's simply the truth.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but I'd rather like a world for my children and my grandchildren to live in, rather, even if it's a Russian one.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm some sort of Chamberlain-esque coward or something, but I'm not. I think pacifism is actually a reasonably sensible position. At the very least, I think war should be very limited. And there's a sort of there's a lack of realism in a lot of the way that people are approaching this that is really shocking, really. I think in the end, yes, in international politics in the world, the strong take, the weak capitulate. But we also know that the strong will have their reward, or indeed already have their reward, and the weak will gain their reward. If we're going to spiritualize it a little bit, Russia have their reward, but they don't have everlasting life. There may be individual Christians amongst them, but generally speaking, I think I don't know quite where I'm going with that, but
I know what you mean. What you mean?
Do you know what I mean?
There'll be justice one
There'll
way
be justice,
in the end. And I agree with that. And I'm not a pacifist, as you know, John. But this thing about the World War II comparison, which the liberal commentariat, it seems to be the only comparison they're capable of making, is absolutely absurd. Like, Putin is not Hitler. And the situation with Russia and Ukraine is completely different to what was going on in the 1930s and 40s with Germany and the rest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world. Ukraine, I think I'm right in saying, is that Ukraine was actually part of Russia up until the Second World War, or was it after the First World War?
It's been Russian variably. I mean, it's been part of Greater Russia, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's arguably part of the same country anyway. And the fact that there's a conflict between the two nations is not easily mappable onto the Nazis versus the Allies.
It's a very bad historic analogy for this one.
It's
better off looking at World War One, where country after country got sucked into what should have been a minor conflict in the Balkans and ended up with war between empires.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, because that's really what we're in danger of. In World War One, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire having a battle in a sideshow in Serbia that led to World War One in the end because of a network of alliances and no one said, well, actually, no,
Yeah. I found the tweet by John Milbank I was looking for. He wrote, he's written, there is probably no road to peace. Presumably what he means is there is probably no road to peace. It is likely that this conflict will have to be fought through to the end. The future looks obscure, if not bleak, but yielding to monstrous aggression and injustice is never the right course. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. He's saying that we cannot yield to monstrous aggression and injustice, even in a conflict that has literally nothing to do with us. We have to fight the abstract concepts of aggression and injustice. And
Jesus did yield. I mean, we could once again go to the Bible. The whole point of the crucifixion story is that Jesus did yield to injustice.
Yeah,
he didn't say this is wrong and cause an army of angels. Was it famously? Is it the Garden of Gethsemane? I can't remember. Don't you think that God could send 10,000 angels to fight for me?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I take your point, Tom. I mean, the point I'm making is that, Milbank wants to start a nuclear war over values that he wants to impose on Russia. And I just think that is absurd. I think
I sort of don't really, I mean, following that through, I mean, actually, I would say that I believe that we had some values that are worth fighting for. I mean, I think they're going now and worth even propagating and worth spreading. But I mean, generally speaking, that's verboten now, isn't it?
Not via war, but international conflict to spread values.
No.
That's like the liberal sort of Enlightenment liberal paradigm that has caused so much misery and death and destruction all over the world. Fighting insofar as, like, if somebody's going to invade your country and and take it over and change your way of life in some way which is unacceptable for you, fine, fair enough. And maybe that's what the Ukrainians would say about what's going on in Russia, in Ukraine, sorry, with Russia. But this is nothing to do with us, and we should not be imposing our values on our conflict in Eastern Europe. It could lead to nuclear war. But that's exactly what somebody like John Milbank is advocating. I'm not saying there's no reason that there should ever be an international war, but I think it should have something to do with your country. It should be something to do with you. But this hasn't got anything to do with us. We're just getting involved in it because it's a cause célèbre. It's madness. It's like the kind of zenith of the virtue signaling social media age, that we are going to start a nuclear war in order to show off, essentially. It's absolutely crazy. It could be the end of civilization because this madness. Is it not worth trying to avoid that?
Yeah.
I think we're on the same page, Tom. I'm sure our listeners will agree as well. Should we it's just a joke. I know there's different opinions. Should we listen to some clips from a clip from the address from Trump yesterday? This is the list of stuff that Doge have found out the US have been wasting their money on. Doge's most egregious findings are outlined by Trump here in his address to Congress. So firstly, he gets Elon Musk up, and Musk kind of bows, and half the people boo and half them clap. And then after that, let's see.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Everybody here, even this side, appreciates it, I believe.
Referring to the
they just don't want to admit that. Just listen to some of the appalling waste we have already identified. $22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $45 million.
I'm not laughing at illegal aliens, but the pause is what I was laughing at. It's a funny pause. Let's just go back.
From HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $60 million for indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombian empowerment in Central America. $60 million. $8 million for making mice transgender. This is real. $32 million for a left-wing propaganda operation in Moldova. $10 million for male circumcision in Mozambique. $20 million for the Arab Sesame Street in the Middle East. It's a program. $20 million for a program. $1.9 billion to recently created Decarbonization of Homes Committee, headed up, and we know she's involved. Just at the last moment, the money was passed over by a woman named Stacey Abrams. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't actually know who that is.
A $3.5 million consulting contract for lavish fish monitoring.
Just it goes on for absolutely ages. Do you know who Stacey Abrams is?
Let's find out, shall we? It's Grok. Who is Stacey Abrams?
I love that bit where he says about Lesotho. In the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody's ever heard of.
She's a Democratic Party politician.
Okay, so it's like so it's conflict of interest. Sounds like anyway. And then the other funny line there is about to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that means.
Yeah.
Classic Trump. Anyway, he apparently was the longest address to Congress ever. and brought the house down. There's also some funny bits of people being ejected and all kinds of stuff going on there.
Yep.
At one stage, Vance makes did you see that clip of him making the remove him sign from
I can't see that. Yeah.
Al Green, a congressman from Texas, waved his cane, shouted, and was led out. And after JD Vance gave a security man a remove him signal with his hand, which is the classic, like when Mr. Burns says to Smithers on The Simpsons, "Destroy them," and then Smithers, gives a gesture. It was a bit like that. So anyway, it was that. The only other thing we didn't talk about is Vance making those comments about the UK and Britain being was he referring to UK and Britain, when he said country?
Well, some people claim yes, some people claim no. I mean, we've not fought certainly haven't fought a conventional war in 30, 40 years, have we?
No, I don't think he was referring to Britain and France, and I wouldn't find it offensive if he was, to be honest with you. I know some people may object to that, but it seems like...
I guess the closest to a conventional war we've had is Iraq too in those 30 to 40 years, isn't it? Second Gulf War. But I mean, he didn't refer to any countries. I don't think you could, people are like literally all over the news in our countries, like JD Vance has said this about Britain. It's like, no, he didn't. He didn't mention Britain. And he explicitly said afterwards that he wasn't referring to Britain. Yeah. So I just think it's ridiculous, personally. And even if he was referring to Britain and France, I still think the point he's making is reasonable, which is that if America have an economic interest in Ukraine, it will make it less likely for Russia to invade because they know it will be committing an act of war against the US. It's one of these things where Keir Starmer has been again completely failing. He's trying to lead without listening, because the Russians have said that it's a red line for them to have NATO troops in Ukraine. It's the same as Ukraine joining NATO. Unfortunately, like I say, we are losing this war.
Mm-hmm.
We have to acknowledge that.
Well, they're losing the war. We're not losing it.
Well, okay. Ukraine,
yeah. Anyway, there we go, Tom. I think we've said our piece, haven't we? I'd be interested to hear what people think about that. But and also, I am reluctant to talk about this stuff. Really, I mean, we haven't talked very much about Ukraine recently because we're not experts in international diplomacy or anything like that. We're just giving our takes, aren't we, from our sort of
exactly
perspective. Our non-expert. We're not experts. People, you feel free to disagree if you want. I just want there to not be a nuclear war. That's basically what I want.
Main aim, no nuclear war.
Main aim, yeah. Anyway, send us an email if you'd like, irreverendpod@gmail.com. Tell us what you think. And yes, and also support the show by going to irreverendpod.com and becoming a Patreon today. As I said, we need the money to fund the show. I also live off the money I make podcasting and writing, so really appreciate it. Click on the big red button and become a Patreon today for as little as £1.50 plus VAT in the UK per month. So it costs very, very little. Anyone should be able to do it if you like the show, if you appreciate what we're doing. Or subscribe to us on Substack, which is now a possibility, irreverendpod.substack.com. And you get all the same benefits, the uncollared audio bonus podcast and the early episodes on there as well. And any other free stuff we decide to chuck in, of which there will be some, listener, of which there will be some. So please do subscribe and help us out or buy us a coffee. Same website, reverendpod.com. Click on the yellow button. Today, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Should we say some prayers? Yeah.
Should we do the, or do you want to do a proper prayer? Or do you want to, I don't mean a proper prayer, but we could do the Ash Wednesday Collect.
Ash Wednesday Collect is a good idea, isn't it?
Then why don't you do that? We'll finish.
I'll just get it up. Which we use, of course, through Lent.
Every day. Every day, Tom.
Should we do it in... sorry, I'll get the Book of Common Prayer version up.
Every day.
Every day. It's much better Book of Common Prayer.
Such
a quiz. Right, here we are. Let's pray. Almighty and everlasting God, who hatest nothing that thou hast made, and dost forgive the sins of all them that are penitent, create and make in us new and contrite hearts, that we, worthily lamenting our sins and acknowledging our wretchedness, may obtain of thee, the God of all mercy, perfect remission and forgiveness through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you all.
Thank you, Tom. God bless, and thank you for your time. Thank you, listeners. Until next time, keep watch.
And stay awake.
Amen.